Welcome to our local government AI project planning video. This is the second video in our governance and AI strategy series, and these videos are designed for public sector managers or leaders to help them evaluate, plan, and implement AI projects in their organizations. Our video outline for today is to spend a few minutes giving you a quick orientation on the background of the data and the things we're going to discuss. Next, we're going to go over some results from a recent local government AI survey that came out in July and go over some of its key insights. From there, we'll talk about some best practices so you can think about how to leverage AI in your organization. And we'll sort of wrap up the tail end of the video by discussing things like chatbots, return on investment for AI projects, and ways that you might be able to do an evaluation of projects that you implement. And then lastly, we'll wrap up the video with any other concluding thoughts, parting advice, and resources that we'll link in the comment section. Real quickly, before we move on, please be sure to like the video and think about subscribing to our channel. The Public Sector Learning Lab is a community for public sector workers and managers. We cover AI topics, AI tools, and other related content. So everyone is talking about AI right now. It's a huge buzzword, particularly in the private sector. It's all over LinkedIn. If you like one article, you're just going to constantly have your news feed filled with AI stuff. In the public sector, we're hearing about AI. We have more and more organizations that are exploring AI concepts at a basic level, but we still have a lot of leaders and managers who don't really understand what AI is, what it can potentially do, and how to bring it into the organization in a responsible and ethical way. So we're going to provide you a little bit of background in this video, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll be able to make some better decisions when you're thinking about AI and how to bring it into your organization. So moving on, we're going to talk about a recent AI survey that was released by the National Association of Counties, or NACo for short. We'll refer to them as NACo for the rest of the video. The NACo AI report was released this past July, and it has a lot of good information in it for public sector leaders. I'll be sure to provide a link to the study in the video description so that you can read more about the report later. Over the past year or so, as I mentioned earlier, there's been very limited data about AI in public sector organizations. Mostly what we've heard is people exploring the concept. As a result, it's been hard to tell what tools are trending, to find good use cases, and other related information to help local governments make decisions. The NACo AI report highlights what tools people are currently using, identifies some best practices that are being adopted at the county level, and it provides a bit more of a roadmap than previous studies about how to think about evaluating, planning, and implementing AI projects in your local government or public sector workplace. Prior to this point, we mainly saw studies from consulting groups that either talked about worldwide data and key metrics or flat out only discussed things that are related to the private sector. There are similarities between things that are going on in the public and private sector, but in general, the public sector is not exploring and evaluating AI solutions on enterprise scales. Quite frankly, most local governments are simply not that size, but the typical small to medium size government or regional organizations like regional councils or public authorities are probably exploring AI in a method similar to what we'll see in this NACo report. So let's jump right into the survey findings and get to the good stuff. The first survey that we're going to look at is a pie chart that shows the AI tools that county employees are using in their home life and shows the percentage of survey responders who are using each tool. ChatGPT is leading the pack, and it's not really a surprise given how much news and exposure that ChatGPT has gotten since it was the first major AI tool to be released to the masses. The second most common AI tool in the survey was Grammarly, and it's less of a chatbot and more of an AI tool that people use to help proofread and correct grammar. Quite frankly, it's a little surprising to see it on the list because it's typically a tool and not a content creator like ChatGPT. However, I have read on policy blogs and other government regulation type sites that they do seem to question what may or may not be considered AI that could come under future governmental regulation. I may have to make a future post update at some point, but at least for right now, things like Grammarly are probably a low risk for government regulation in public sector work environments. Google Bard, now called Gemini, is a somewhat free generative AI chat tool that's easy and quick to use. Literally all you need to have is a Google account. The main problem with Gemini is that Google was late to the generative AI game, and they've been playing catch up ever since. The result of that has been that Google has released updates of Gemini, and they've been caught on the carpet several times for generating obvious inaccuracies. So I would highly advise that any person or organization whose people are relying on Google Gemini do a strong level of proofreading and fact checking before you use any of that information in any type of official government report. The last major AI chatbot we see on the survey is Bing. Bing is typically a search engine from Microsoft, but in the last year or so, they partnered with OpenAI to expand Bing's capability into what we now know as Microsoft Copilot. Microsoft Copilot is powered by ChatGPT 4, and as of this video, it has some of the same common capabilities that you would find with a subscription version of ChatGPT. The main difference is it's been wrapped into a Microsoft wrapper, so to speak, and they have their own set of controls and limitations built into it. It's not quite as good as core ChatGPT, but if you're looking for a free option, Microsoft Copilot is fairly decent for basic day-to-day usage. If we move over to the Gen AI usage in the work environment by county employees, we see similar results to what we saw in the personal use survey. You still have ChatGPT coming in first, but this time Bing and Copilot comes in second, followed by Grammarly and then Google Bard. So what this really tells you is that the study assumptions that are out there now by major consulting firms that implied that people are using AI at home and bringing it to work are relatively true, particularly if that organization hasn't implemented AI in the workplace. And I say that because recently released studies by major consulting firms indicate that only 2% of public sector organizations worldwide are actively implementing AI projects in the workplace right now. The rest of the public sector organizations are either in some phase of exploration or possibly don't even have an AI solution on their radar screen in the first place. We'll talk a little bit about it later in the video, but there is a certain level of risk for a public sector organization to try to implement AI when they don't have good policies in place to govern how their employees are going to use them on behalf of the organization. Moving on to best practices. The best practices that were outlined in the NACo report are similar to studies and reports that we've seen from the private sector side already. I've gone over a fair bit of this in my first governance video, so if you haven't watched that, please be sure to check it out after you finish watching this one. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to keep it at a fairly high level and connect the dots for the major steps while providing some additional comments along the way. The first thing that all best practices advise you to do is establish an organizational policy that governs how you're going to use generative AI in the workplace. You want to make sure that your policy meets regulatory and legal compliance standards for your state and governs any data security or data confidentiality that may be required by your state law or funding organization. Quite frankly, a lot of times funding organizations pass down additional requirements. I'll say the big thing here is everyone typically advises you not to keep confidential information inside of any AI platform and not to have employees uploading any confidential information to those providers or platforms if the state law doesn't prohibit it already. Another main component you want to make sure you're using your AI for is you want to use it in an ethical and responsible manner. And what that means is you want to be using your AI tools in a way where there's no built-in bias when they're rendering answers, and you want to ensure that AI is transparent and accountable to your citizens or your board or your other stakeholders. You need to easily be able to explain how you're using your AI. From there, the next step is to establish some type of working group to look for use cases that fit the needs of your organization. I was reading not too long ago in different reports that a large majority of leaders feel pressure to implement anything with AI because it's the current buzzword of the day. Quite frankly, that's not a very good idea, just to go out and bring in AI solutions without doing proper research and analysis and on whether or not it's a good organizational fit. Quite frankly, that can backfire drastically. You can also waste a lot of money and time if you don't do proper research to find the right solution that you can bring in to test and scale up across the organization. A major component is training your workforce to use these platforms and tools. Just because you make it available doesn't mean people know how to use it in an effective, responsible way. I think that's where the real struggle lies for the public sector at the moment, because other solutions like chatbots or things like Grammarly or Canva that have AI components are one thing, but being able to bring something in like ChatGPT, Claude, or Perplexity and scale it across the organization is a little more difficult to pull off in small to medium-sized governments or other types of public entities. You've got to be thinking about what types of skills match your AI solution that you want to bring into the agency. How are you going to get employees trained? How are they going to put them together in a collaborative and effective way so that they can learn to use the tool together? And then how are you going to push that out to testing and live implementation in a reasonable amount of time? What I'll say about the workforce training right now is there is a lot of places you can go to train people on things like prompt engineering, generative AI, or ethical and trustworthy AI, but there are actually a lot of barriers to be able to bring in feasible solutions that allow you to set up the tool of the platform at an organizational scale so that people can work together and learn and collaborate effectively. In my prompt engineering playlist, I've gone over things about ChatGPT, the Teams plan that allows smaller organizations to get the office level accounts and potentially coordinate with one another. But the time to set that up and scale it in an efficient way can be a real barrier for small to medium governments and other organizations. For example, I could do a chat to summarize a report and share that with people across my organization, but I'm having to do that for each individual chat as opposed to, say, a department that can routinely see and share what's going on across the board and then quickly have people pick up that chat and collaborate on an as-needed basis. Perhaps those things will change in time, but a lot of what I'm seeing right now relies on an individual sharing their work with others too much of the time. The last part of best practices you want to make sure you're covering is actually getting results, being able to evaluate whether or not the tool that you brought in was effective and works like you want it to. When I was talking earlier about people bringing in AI solutions without a whole lot of research and a whole lot of training, there's cases out there right now where people have done that and not trained their employees, and then the employees start to use these tools, and then the next thing you know, there's all these reports or operational types of data that are getting out that turn out not to be factual or in some cases even embarrassing to the organization. So you really need to test these things really well and make sure that everybody is trained and knows what to do before you send them out to the public. All right, so let's move on into AI project selection. Okay, so when you're starting to think about AI project selection, I want to just bring your attention to this chart really quick. A year and a half ago, there were like 3 icons on a chart like this for AI solutions for the majority of us. And so if you're paying attention to LinkedIn or you're reading GovTech magazine and some of their stuff, what you're going to see is the menu of AI tools is getting larger and larger and larger. And so now we have a wheel that looks like this one over here, and it's just getting more massive all the time. I mean, matter of fact, on this wheel, I can't even read what the icons say anymore because they've crammed so many in there trying to market them to us. And so the long story short here is that there's going to constantly be a new infusion of AI tools. Literally every week, there's going to be new ones, and they're all going to promise to solve your problem and make the world a better place. But I go back to do your research, look at some core AI tools, and once you select them, stick with them and don't get distracted by the latest new shiny tools that come out. Because quite frankly, a lot of them are running off the same back end. They're selling you the same thing, slightly repackaged, and you may not need it in the first place. All right, so when we think about AI project selection in local government, a few paths emerge. I typically feel like you've got one of 4 directions. The first one is a customer facing AI solution. And that's one where you're trying to put something out there on your website or social media or something like that. And you're trying to give the citizens an easier way to interface with the government, whether that's finding information or ordering some kind of service or attending a public hearing. That's kind of what I'm talking about there with customer facing tools. They're typically going to be a little different than some of the other tools that I'm talking about with chatbots. And they tend to be a little bit more proprietary. But there are customer facing solutions that can run off ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity interfaces. You just have to spend time and money to make sure they're configured appropriately. The other pathway is using AI to help deliver services. And again, some of that could be a combination of those customer facing services that lead you to the actual people who are planning, coordinating, and delivering the governmental service. So you come in through a customer facing portal, it's routing you to the planning and zoning department for something. And then the planning and zoning people are using a different AI to actually read, review, create, process, or whatever related to a planning and zoning request. So you've got other services like transit, or you've got things like in the social service area. And so in this case, you may have the services that help somebody sign up, or it may help somebody get a better linkage to workforce development services and where to go in your local area for that. So essentially those service level AIs are, their job is more or less to connect a citizen to an actual governmental service that's going to take care of their individual need. The third major path is what I see as administration, back end office work. Well, take myself, for example. If somebody sends me a 300-page report, normally that would take hours to read. I don't have hours to read all the 300-page reports that I get sent. But what I do have time to do is put that in ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude and ask it to summarize the report, give me the key findings, provide a list of any recommendations, and then identify any action steps that I might need to take based on that report. I can give you another example. I could potentially use ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude to read a grant application and to help me understand what the grant is about, what are the main components of the grant application, what do I need to do to get it submitted, and then help me brainstorm some ideas and possibly even other types of grants that have been funded from this type of a grant opportunity in the past. Other types of administrative uses could be basic paperwork. You can set these things up to help do anything from policy updates to employee training to you can even set up subject matter experts with AI to increase the efficiency of your internal staff. So there's a whole lot of other things that can go on behind the scenes in administration that, quite frankly, help out a ton. And then the last road really is dead end. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier in best practices. That's literally somebody who goes out there and goes to a conference or sits in a webinar and they get the 100,000-foot view of AI and they think, wow, this is a nifty thing. And then they don't do their homework. They don't try to find organizational fit. They just bring it into the organization and roll it out, whatever the consequences may be. And so on my LinkedIn, I've actually got one of the posts that somebody put, I reposted, and there's a good example of a police department rolling it out and failing epically because they didn't bother to train anybody. All right, let's move on. We're going to take a little bit deeper dive into things about AI project selection so that we can help you make an informed choice. Okay, so looking at AI as a service for local governments basically refers to the use of cloud-based artificial intelligence solutions to enhance public service, streamline operations, and improve community engagement. So there's different ways that you can do that. But unless you're running on your own architecture, which you need to have a pretty big budget, IT staff, lots of redundancy. I mean, if you're a major metropolitan area, then you can probably run AI as a service on your own with limited to zero involvement from third-party providers. But most of us aren't in that situation. Again, as we talked earlier, you look at enhanced public services, and how you do that is you can do that with a combination of chatbots, virtual assistants, or AI-powered chatbots that can provide instant, personalized responses to citizens around the clock. And what that really does is, for a minimal investment, you can improve responsiveness and reduce the workload on your human staff. So everybody wants to do more with less. So if you have a smart AI that can take the load off of your staff, then you have a way to do that. Other examples are smart traffic management. I think we've all seen those if you've lived in or around metropolitan environments. And you have AI use that can help you identify and assess certain types of infrastructure. You can do that with images, GPT vision. There's a lot of different ways to potentially do that. Streamline internal operations. Again, automated administrative tasks. What can AI handle that's just routine data entry, document processing, categorizing service requests, and then freeing up your staff time for other more complex duties? The next thing that we're looking at is improved decision making. How can AI analyze large data sets to help provide insights for planning, resource allocation, and policy making? And so if you think, I'm a small to medium-sized government, I don't have large data sets. Well, in a way you do. You've got data that is compiled on you from the Census Bureau. Usually your state demographer's office has information. You typically have your departments that are delivering services and they're keeping data. And so I think the question there is, if you don't think that you have large amounts of data, what you really should do is sit down with your key people and try to understand what types of data that you do have, where it is, and then have a discussion about how you can organize that data to work with an AI and help improve overall decision making. And as I mentioned before, you have large processing. AI can help in drafting content, summarizing reports, crunching numbers, compile surveys. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that internal operations can be streamed, but it all goes back to what kind of data do you have and what state is it in? Is it easily assembled? That's a big question, because if you're going to move into the AI world at some point, you're going to have to take the time to assemble some data, or no AI is going to be as helpful to you as it could. Community engagement and resource management. As I mentioned before, you can get feedback analysis. It can process large volumes of citizen feedback on different things. That can be anything from that front facing customer service side AI that I was talking about a little bit earlier in the video, to you're using something like SurveyMonkey and you're just pulling in the information and running it through ChatGPT to get some data analysis and some findings. So I mean, there's two different ways to tackle that, and there's two different ends of the cost spectrum and the amount of staff time you have to invest as well. Other examples are just smart energy management. Any data that you can pull about water usage, electricity usage, or other things that internal staff can take those numbers, run some analysis, and maybe make some decisions quicker. And then we all know about urban planning, but you also have rural planning. And if you have data, AI can help you in planning. We talked a little bit about this when we were going over best practices, but again, I can't emphasize enough data privacy and security. You have to ensure that AI systems comply with data protection regulations and maintain your citizen privacy. There's a lot of unknowns out there right now about whether or not AI really uses your data. And in some cases, you can check a box that says, no, you can't use my data. But even then, are we sure? And so one of the ways to take care of that is you just don't upload any confidential or personally identifiable information to an AI, and then you can run your analysis or power your chatbot or do other things that you need to do with it. But make sure you've got somebody whose job is to redact sensitive information. And then in other cases, there's just certain types of personal or confidential information that just shouldn't be uploaded to an AI, period. And so I think that's part of where you've got to do a little bit of an internal inventory about how you're going to come up with your knowledge base, what's going to be in it, and what's off limits. Going back to the ethical use of AI, again, you want to be able to explain to your board or to the public about how your AI works. Where does your data come from? And so, if you're looking at planning data, you can say, hey, look, it comes from zoning ordinances, it comes from land use maps, it might come from geographic information systems, so on and so forth. But we're not using your confidential information to come up with this planning and zoning chatbot. Staff training, again, you have to make sure that you're investing in training programs to effectively equip your staff to use and manage these tools. If you don't, you're going to put yourself in a situation where people are going to trust AI too much, and then it's going to generate something that's farcical, and then you're going to get caught in it. And it doesn't matter that the city council approved that you could use it and the lawyer signed off that it was okay and 5 other people approved the use of this AI. All it's going to take is one ridiculous scenario to embarrass your organization that boils down to staff weren't properly trained, and you've got a problem as a manager or leader. So ensure staff were trained. If you ask me how you do that, I would say look at my prompt engineering playlist on at the top of my YouTube, because it doesn't matter what tool you're using. Prompt engineering is prompt engineering is prompt engineering. And so watch that, look at the resources that I've got attached to those videos, because it gives you other ways to learn how to prompt. And over time, you're going to see more organizations develop training tracks and training certifications around prompt engineering, ethical use, so on and so forth. If you look on LinkedIn, you'll see that there's people posting almost on a daily basis lists of free courses. Now, what I'll say there is some of those courses want you to sign up for a limited period of time, and then it's not free. So be real careful about that. But the point is there is free training out there that you can take advantage of to train your staff. And then lastly, we're looking at cost benefit analysis. You need to carefully evaluate the investment to get into this, and then what the long-term implications or benefits are of using an AI solution. And what I'll tell you is I encounter a lot of scenarios where somebody's trying to sell you something. It looks like a new chatbot, or it looks like a new tool or whatever. And then you get in there and you pop under the hood and you start looking around, and what you find is this is really just somebody's proprietary user interface that they've taken, and then they've plugged ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity into the back end. And so they're charging you 2 sets of fees. One, to be a member for the exclusive right to use their fancy interface. And 2, they've connected to ChatGPT, Claude, or Perplexity, or somebody else's user interface in the background, and then you're getting charged usage fees. So maybe if you're small, medium, private sector, you're not churning through tons of data, and maybe that doesn't amount to a lot. But if you're a government and you look at the volume of paperwork that we're dealing with, that's a pretty big hidden cost. So when you're working with these vendors and you're looking at cost benefit, you need to ask, am I being charged data usage fees for creating things, scanning stuff, so on and so forth? And if the answer is yes, then you need to get some details. One positive thing about that, though, is if you think about how things were when cell phones first came out, a lot of y'all may remember you got charged on your minutes, and everybody had to manage the minutes, because if you went over those minutes on that plan, it was just you'd get an outrageous bill. And the data usage fees, or if you're using anything that pulls off of the back end of the major commercial AI providers, they're kind of like those cell phone minutes. And so right now it can be an expensive proposition, but about every month they're coming out with new standards and formats, and they're figuring out ways to make the data usage smarter, the requirements smaller, and reducing the cost. So again, if you're dealing with any of these vendors that are charging you some API use backend as part of the product solution, then do a little homework and find out, what it is, and then see if their AI provider, like ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or whoever. See if that provider has had any recent developments where they've lowered the cost of what they call usage and tokens. And so there was one that came out just this week that I'm recording this video, and they're dropping the cost significantly. So you want to make sure that's built in when you're talking to vendors. All right, chatbots, the good and the bad. So we were talking a little bit about chatbots earlier on, and the reason that I'm spending time on those is because that second path and third path to looking at AI in small to medium local governments really does rely on you interacting with some kind of chatbot or creating some kind of chatbot. So what we want to do is just go over some of the key features here. Now, to me, there's 3 levels of chatbots. There's a basic chatbot, like the one you encounter when you go on somebody's website and it's trying to ask you, how can I help you? So on and so forth. And that either may be a chatbot or some kind of virtual assistant. And there's differences between the two that we're looking at here on this screen. And then there are AI powered chatbots. And so really, if we go down here and we're looking at features, we've got normal chatbots. They follow present rules, which means they're only as smart as what you've told them, what you've loaded into the knowledge base. So if I gave you an example, I could give you an example of you create a chatbot, you load it up with your personnel policy, and that's all that chatbot knows. And it will only ever know your personnel policy up to the most recent version that has actually been loaded into it. So if your board approves an updated policy and an employee were to use that HR chatbot to get some updated info, that chatbot would not know it unless its knowledge base had been updated. So that really goes down to response complexity. Is it's only going to give predefined responses based on what it knows. Typically, it's looking for keywords when you're typing stuff in, and it has limited integration ability with websites or your local network or things like that. AI chatbots are much smarter. They're able to understand what you're telling them, and they're also able to generate additional content, basically make predictions. But they also work off of a knowledge base. They have a knowledge base that you feed them, and then they have access to a broader knowledge base. So like ChatGPT or Claude, you can give them a document, and they're going to look at that document, and they're going to look at what you're asking them to do, and they're going to compare that, and then they're going to also compare their larger knowledge, and then they're going to try to predict and generate a solution. So you can develop customized AI chatbots for your local government for anything from personnel to training to stimulating an experienced staff that could work to either make your current staff more productive or to even help a new employee learn quicker and become more productive. Lots of different ways to potentially use that. But it learns through machine learning. So again, it's going to get smarter over time. Virtual assistants, that can be anything from really low hanging fruit, like a automated phone system, to complex things like Siri and Alexa. Typically with the virtual assistants, you're just leasing some capacity from a larger carrier, and then they're providing a certain level of service to you. From a cost perspective, it really just depends on what it is you're doing. If you're wanting to know what the cost of those things are, again, the simple chatbot right now, based on 2024 numbers, depending on what you're wanting it to do, the cost can range between $8,000 and $150,000 to develop a customized chatbot. The cost is going to be based on what kind of features do you want it to do, what level of integrations do you want, how much customization somebody needs to put in there, and are you building this in-house or have you outsourced it? Now, there's pros and cons to all of these situations, but if you're building it in-house, then yeah, you're definitely responsible for the personnel cost, the assembling the knowledge base, the data. But if you were building a service level chatbot that only focused on that one service and only what it knows, and it was highly customized, then at least right now, that average cost range could be anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000 to get an experienced person to do it. Now, that's completely different than using ChatGPT and creating a custom GPT and throwing some Word documents in there to give it some knowledge, because you really can't control all the different things that custom ChatGPT would do or not. So all I'll say here is a customizable, singular focused chatbot that knows its stuff really well is completely different than going and making a cheap custom ChatGPT chatbot or using some third-party group like u.com and uploading a couple of page knowledge base. We're not even in the same ballpark when we're talking about those chatbots versus the kind that we're talking about here on the screen. All right, moving on to AI chatbots, the ones that can learn, the ones that can reason, the ones that, again, get smarter over time. They might be a specialist in one area, but they're an expert level specialist, or maybe they're an expert level generalist. Who knows? It depends on how you want these things built. But typically, they're running with retrieval augmented databases, also called RAG for short. So RAG vector database setups. Typically here, you're dealing with large quantities of data, or you want this bot to be really, really smart, or you want this bot to be able to have a broad menu of things that it does really well. The costs range from $100,000 to $300,000 right now in 2024, depending on the scale and complexity. And that's because an AI-powered chatbot is just not a simple chatbot that you can develop and toss on your website. It needs a lot of capability to think and reason and deal with the large chunks of data. And there's a lot that goes into the back-end programming and setup. Usually you're hosting this on some kind of third-party platform because you need computer power, you need storage, and you need a lot of bandwidth, because these AI chatbots are either processing a lot of data or they're learning. So they get smarter over time. And typically they're built to either be an expert in one thing, or they're built to be able to handle multiple things at a proficient level and perform other types of follow-up. So there's things that go into it. So if you're going to develop an AI chatbot, be sure to have a good idea of what it is you really want to develop here, because you're going to sink some money into it and you want your investment to be worth it. Finishing off with the virtual assistants, as I mentioned earlier, they're typically on an hourly, monthly, maybe sometimes yearly arrangement, depending on who your provider is. And rates across the world are anywhere from $2 to $100 an hour on average as of 2024. And then you compare that to the cost of a full-time employee in the United States right now, which is about $75,000 a year. And you can do your own cost benefit analysis there. So the cost is going to vary depending on what you need it to do. I've given some types of work down here at the bottom. But again, really low complexity is going to be a lower cost, and higher complexity is going to be a much higher cost. So when you're thinking about virtual assistants, again, just be thinking about how you need to build that into your organization what it needs to look like, and then who's going to be responsible for ensuring that it's delivered in a quality and ethical and accurate manner. Looking real quick at return on investment and evaluation, I created a couple of quick tools using Claude AI. I turned them into artifacts, and I'll have the links in the video description. But I've given you a little bit of a methodology on how to, potentially evaluate an AI project right now. So that's the pitch deck for the public sector. And at the bottom, there's an ROI calculator, and I've given some instructions on how to use that. So be sure to click those links and have fun with that. You can get some basic things you need to think about when you're evaluating, and you can get some basic numbers on potential ROI. So this concludes our second video in our governance series. I hope that you've learned a lot of good information on how to think about an AI project, all the different things that need to go into getting you ready to get and deliver that AI project, and then some information on how to potentially evaluate it. So thanks for sticking with us. You've certainly learned how to explore an AI project, the different types, the different ways you could potentially bring it into your organization. We went over best practices. We went over a little bit of chatbot technology along with associated costs. And then we gave you a quick way to look at ROI and do a basic evaluation on your project. As I look at what comes next in the governance and AI video series, what I could see is more of a walkthrough on an actual project, or things related to how to help train your workforce, or maybe even some examples on how to platform and bring AI into the organization and help people collaborate in an easier manner. I'd love to hear your ideas on anything else you'd like to see in this strategy and governance series. So be sure to leave me something in the comments, or shoot me an email, or send me a message on LinkedIn. Here at the YouTube channel, you got multiple ways to get a hold of me, and I'd love to hear from you. If you're working in the public sector and doing something in AI and you would like to potentially put a video on the channel, be sure to let me know, and we'll see if we can work something out. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thanks.